views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
We'll get started now. Pursuant to Chapter 4, Section 85 of the New York City Charter, a meeting of the Bronx Borough Board will take place on Thursday, June 22nd, 2017 at 9:15 a.m. This meeting will take place at 198 East 161st Street, 10th floor conference room. We have 3 items on the agenda this morning. The first one, self-storage text amendment. The second, an overview of smart truck management plan. And the third, the Bronx Empire State Poverty Reduction Initiative. Oh, excuse me, we have a fourth one, current programs initiative. So without any further ado, I'd like to ask Amanda Iyer, a planner for the New York City Department of Planning, to speak to us about self-storage text amendment.
Good. Should not be in the projector's light. Good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Amanda Iyer. I'm here from the Department of City Planning, and I'm here to present a proposed self-storage text amendment. I was here also in February, and I hope you remember that presentation. It's quite similar to what I am proposing or coming back with you to you today. In the meantime, this self-storage text amendment has been referred out. When I came in February, it was to let you know that we were holding a scoping hearing for the environmental review, and we presented this at the May 22nd review session at the City Planning Commission, and now it was referred out and is in review until July 30th. This proposal involves requiring a special permit for new self-storage facilities in IBZs, industrial business zones. And we understand that the self-storage facilities have generated concern among communities and industrial advocates alike. Like many, the city wants to support industrial jobs in IBZs and the industrial business zones. And by doing this here, we're trying to strike a balance between protecting IBZs, protecting those areas, but also allowing self-storage facilities in certain areas because we understand that they do serve a need and they serve a purpose in New York City. This proposal originated in the Office of the Mayor's and the Council's Industrial Action Plan, the 10-point Industrial Action Plan. It was announced in November of 2015, and it included a number of points. It was a 10-point plan, but it had 3 overarching goals, and those were to protect industrial neighborhoods and incentivize development, to align city services to help industrial businesses start, grow, and also thrive, and to also train the city's workforce to meet the needs of the sector. Now, the proposed self-storage text amendment falls into the first category, which is the protection of the city's industrial neighborhoods. What are the industrial business zones? You can see there's a large map or a very small map of them, but overall it's the city's most active industrial neighborhoods. Over 68% of the employment in these areas is industrial based, and these are critical areas for a range of industries ranging from wholesale to construction to transportation, utilities, and manufacturing as well. Since 2010, we have seen that there has been renewed interest in these areas and that industrial employment has been growing. The Industrial Action Plan that the Office of the Mayor and the City Council announced in 2015 builds on a series of existing policies. So IBZs have been around since 2005, if you are familiar with them. And there are already now tax incentives for industrial businesses to locate in these areas. And there are also IBZ service providers that help industrial businesses remain and expand their business in this area. Overall, all of the policies that target the IBZs are for economic development and to support industrial businesses. IBZs, however, they're not in the zoning resolution currently. It doesn't exist in zoning, and so for this proposal, because this affects land use and regulation, we needed to incorporate the boundaries of the IBZs into the zoning. And so we drew zoning boundaries based on the IBZ boundaries, and our zoning boundaries are virtually the same boundaries as the IBZs, and there are very few exceptions with a few tax lots. Sometimes the IBZ boundaries, because they are a tax program, had wiggly boundaries, and we needed to draw more rational boundaries for zoning. But there are really very few exceptions. And less of interest to you, but just in the area of Queens, we took out the airport properties because zoning doesn't really affect those in first place anyway. As you can see, the proposed boundaries, so the areas in pink is where we are proposing this regulation, the self-storage special permit, and they are located in all boroughs except for Manhattan, and they are the same as the IBZs. I'm here with my colleague Jen Gravel, who is also here from the Department of City Planning. What is the issue with self-storage? So we think that the unregulated development detracts from the city's objective for industrial business zones, or which we are calling designated areas and M districts. This is because, first of all, self-storage facilities don't generate many jobs. According to our analysis, it's about 5 jobs per facility. They serve primarily households. Between 70 and 80% of customers we hear are households. This does mean that between 20 and 30% of customers are businesses, but majoritarily, these facilities serve households. And thirdly, self-storage facilities are typically developed on large sites that are right along truck routes and highways. And so those kinds of sites don't exist in abundance in New York City, and we want to, those are optimal sites for industrial businesses, and we want to protect them for industrial businesses. In that sense, self-storage combines like 3 characteristics which result in its development conflicting with the city's economic development objectives for IBZs. Here are a few examples of self-storage facilities that we think are lost opportunities and where a more job-intensive industrial development could have occurred. There are 2 in the Bronx, one on Zarega Avenue and another one in Tillotson, just Eastchester, so in the north. Those are very large sites that are located right next to truck routes, and we think it would have been better if a more job-intensive industrial business would have sited there. We also know that self-storage is in high demand, and it is growing, it's expanding, so we expect more of these facilities to get developed in IBZs. In the past, there were 10 self-storage, in the last 7 years, excuse me, there were 10 self-storage developments in IBZs. On sites that are larger than 20,000 square feet, and that represents almost a quarter of new development on large sites. So it does represent, while 10 isn't a lot, it represents quite a significant chunk of new development on large sites and IBZs. In terms of self-storage, so there are about 240 facilities in the city, and as you can see, they are spread out. They are in every borough. Manhattan, even Staten Island has self-storage facilities. The borough with the most self-storage facilities, I think, is Brooklyn. And currently, a self-storage is classified as a warehouse, and it's permitted in all M and C8 districts. That's where it can locate as of right. And about 1/4 of all self-storage facilities are located in the IBZ, so in the designated areas where we are proposing a restriction. Here's a map of the Bronx. It shows the areas where we are proposing the restriction in pink, the areas where self-storage would remain as of right in blue, orange, and red, or pink, yeah. And also the self-storage facilities. There are currently 52 facilities, according to our counts, in the Bronx, and 16, or just about 1/3 of them, are within the IBZs. We think this proposal will be good for the IBZs because optimal industrial sites will increasingly be preserved for more job-intensive industrial businesses. And we also think that the effect, because on a citywide basis only 2 self-storage facilities are developed in IBZs per year, the effect of the restriction on other areas should be relatively modest. So what we're proposing is a CPC special permit. That's a City Planning Commission special permit for the development of self-storage in designated areas. So currently it's allowed as of right. We're proposing a restriction, meaning a City Planning Commission special permit. And this is a case-by-case site-specific review process that has ULURP associated to it. And this will ensure that a self-storage development doesn't represent a significant lost opportunity for the future siting of an industrial, more job-intensive business. So what we're proposing is that self-storage should be subject to this restriction, and currently self-storage is counted as a warehouse. We will distinguish it, we will define what self-storage is, and we will make sure that this restriction does not apply to other warehouses or moving businesses, because those are more job-intensive businesses, and a lot of what happens in IBZs is warehousing, so that is not something we would want to restrict. So every special permit has findings associated to it, and so if those findings can be made, then the City Planning Commission can grant the special permit. The finding would be that the site is not appropriate for conforming industrial use, and that would be based on a series of considerations, and those considerations will be elaborated upon, but one of the considerations is zoning lot size. So typically what we are seeking to preserve are the large sites, those that stand out as being exceptionally large. So a small site might be appropriate for self-storage, especially combined with some other considerations here. If the site is proximate or not to truck routes, so if it's further away from a truck route, it might also be appropriate for a self-storage facility. If the capacity of the local street, say it's a narrow street that goes to the that goes to the proposed site, then we wouldn't think that it might be able to handle the truck traffic related to an industrial business, and a self-storage could be appropriate there. The finding or the considerations would also look at investment in comparable sites in the vicinity. Are the buildings occupied? Are they active? Are there businesses in them? Or has there been abandonment? Do we want investment of any sort, even a self-storage facility investment? Also, the need for environmental is a site contaminated? Would we rather see it remediated and have a self-storage facility with it instead of it just remaining as it is? And we would also want to consider the potential for conflict with existing uses in the area. So even though these are IBZs, so they're the most active industrial areas, there are on occasion some community facilities or even houses, residential uses that are in the vicinity and have maybe been grandfathered in. So if those would be immediately adjacent to the proposed site, we might not want to see a more active industrial business there, but think that a passive self-storage facility would be more appropriate. So these are the series of considerations, and it doesn't mean that all of an applicant wouldn't have to prove all of those. It could just be a sort of a pick and choose, trying to build an argument that the site isn't appropriate for conforming industrial use. We're proposing that all existing self-storage facilities would be permitted to remain, so they would be grandfathered, and they would also be allowed to extend or enlarge within the zoning lot. We included this provision mainly so that existing self-storage facilities who wish to make minor changes to their facility, such as change maybe where the lobby is or minor changes like that, wouldn't have to seek a special permit. We've seen that with other special permits, that for very minor changes, people would have to come in and get a special permit. We do see the special permit as a significant hurdle to building self-storage facilities in the future in IBZs. It's a discretionary action and is subject to full ULURP. So this means that there is a pre-application process, a land use application, and an environmental application associated with it. This typically takes about 15 months. Once those documents are ready, ULURP begins, and then a community board review would exist for every self-storage facility in an IBZ, borough president review, city planning commission review, and finally it would go to the council. Overall, it's estimated that receiving a special permit takes about 2 years, so it's a rather lengthy process, but we do think that the site-specific review will make sure that appropriate industrial sites don't get developed by self-storage instead. The timeline for this text amendment, so it was first announced in 2015, as I mentioned, that we developed the proposal. We had a scoping hearing in March. Then, and late May, it was referred out, and so now we're in the community board and borough president review period, which will last until July 30th, and then it will go back to the city planning commission. Since this is a text amendment, it's a non-ULURP action, and it follows a very similar clock, but some of the things are different. So, it doesn't follow the same standardized clock as a ULURP action. So thank you very much for your attention. I do need to mention that this proposed zoning text amendment affects the community boards that have IBZs, and in the Bronx, that's community board 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 9, 10, and 12. I believe we have had meetings at the community boards with almost all of these community boards already. Some of them are still scheduled and are happening in the next few weeks. But our staff has reached out to all community boards and prepared presentations. So hopefully you have already heard of this actually. And we're happy to answer any questions, but you can find more information on our website. The project description, the proposed zoning text, and the environmental review documents are all on our website. And you can also contact us per email. We have a self-storage DL that reaches us also. Thank you.
Thank you. Very comprehensive. Are there any questions or comments from anyone? Yes, George.
My name is George. I'm from Community Board 12. So I'm slightly familiar. You were here several months ago. I've spoken with Dana in city planning on a number of occasions. My only question with this text amendment is, in my district, we do have the IBZ, but we also have self-storage facilities that exist in residential neighborhoods, and they've gone to BSA in order to exist there. Would this text amendment, and the concern that I have is one in particular that is right along 95, that they never built out the service roads for where they are. And it's an eyesore, it stands out. Would this text amendment encourage some of these big box developers to go to residential neighborhoods seeking a BSA waiver if they would get denied at the IBZ area? Because again, my concern is this one particular facility is up next year, and I've already been writing letters to BSA, but I know that they're going to get their renewal despite what the community board says, and once they're built, they just kind of exist in perpetuity until someone comes along and says, oh, I can build something that's going to make more money. The people who live there, the private homes that live right across the street from this facility, have half a road. And, you know, it's an eyesore. So my concern would be that if with this text amendment, they go through the process and they're denied ultimately, it's only going to drive them into residential communities like mine, and where they would go to BSA. Like, are we going to preclude them from doing that in the future? Or, I mean, if they get denied in the IBZ, then that's it, like they can't exist?
I don't think it would encourage more of that. I mean, the zoning does not allow the self-storage facility already in a residential district. If they're going to the BSA, that means that they have a site-specific hardship and they can't get a reasonable return. So there's basically a constitutional requirement that we have to offer relief from zoning. The BSA doesn't have to allow a self-storage facility there, but they have to allow some sort of use that provides an economic return to the property owner. And that's really on a case-by-case basis. And I don't think there's anything about this action that would necessarily result in more BSA actions for this use in a residential area, because it's really on a case-by-case, site-specific basis and would depend on that individual property's circumstances.
Also, maybe to add that a number of the self-storage facilities...
Can you talk into the mic, please?
Oh, sorry. A number of the self-storage facilities that are in residential areas are also conversions of pre-existing warehouses. So warehouses, industrial facilities that were in these areas before the 1961 zoning was put into place, and so they were grandfathered, and so the industrial uses are allowed to continue, and in many cases those have lately been converted to self-storage facilities, which is permitted. What we have seen in looking at the data is that, you know, between 2000 and 2010 there were a lot of conversions of existing facilities to self-storage, and that has almost entirely stopped in the last 2 or 3 years, because now the self-storage companies are just doing ground-up new construction self-storage facilities. In part, we think that's because most of the good buildings for conversion have already been converted. So hopefully, we think that in the future there will be a lot less conversions and mainly new construction, and that is prohibited in residential areas.
That's not answering. Go ahead.
So you guys went through this process, or city planning went through this process. One of the things that I had raised previously was in these districts, they were also, you're using this to sort of discourage the building of self-storage facilities. I had also proposed or made a suggestion that you would look at these areas also for the preclusion of building hotels, motels, because we have a problem here in the Bronx where they target these M11 districts and try to put hotels that then eventually turn into shelters. Now, the city is sort of going in a different direction. They've made statements that they're no longer going to do that, but the fear still exists. Are you looking at any other sort of, after this is done, are you going to be looking to make any other changes to the zoning text in terms of IBZs?
We are doing hotels as a separate action, and more broadly, actually, in all the light manufacturing, the M1 districts. So it's actually a broader geography than the IBZs. And the reason that it's not traveling together is for that very reason, because it's a broader geography. So it was going to require more work on our part to understand the effects of that. But yes, I mean, the idea there is to have a similar mechanism, a city planning commission special permit for new hotels in light manufacturing districts. So and that would include all of the IBZs.
Are there any other questions, comments? Bob?
Yes, good morning. My name is Roberto Crespo from Community Board 2. The concern when you guys made the presentation to our land use committee, there was concerns to the fact of, and similar to what George was talking about, how we're going to prevent those others that want to come back up, that want to build storage facilities, but not in the IBZ zones. And the concerns is that you just finished saying it's going to take 2 years, approximately. Those 2 years, I'd rather go outside of an IBZ zone and do it within 6 months. Why can't we just put all the storage facilities into this, future, right into this legislation?
The purpose of this legislation is really to support the objectives of the industrial policy and the industrial business zones. I do understand there are concerns more broadly about self-storage. It is, however, it is a legal industry, and it's a business that actually does provide a service for New Yorkers. We do need to maintain some reasonable siting opportunities for them, and there's really not, because they're only allowed in our light manufacturing and our sort of heavy commercial, the C8 districts, there's not a lot of places where they can go. And the City Planning Commission special permit provides an opportunity. It's a significant hurdle, and we do see it actually as not exactly a prohibition, but pretty close to it. And so having that same rule very broadly applied would pretty severely restrict where these facilities could go in the city. And we do need to maintain some reasonable siting opportunities. So that's one of the things we have to sort of weigh when we think about placing new limitations on a use.
No, I understand that, but what I'm saying is to make any future storage facilities comply with the same legislation, doing the ULIP application, doing remedial if that needs to be remedial. All of that stuff before, include them into the legislation, making those guidelines from the IBZ zone also into the light areas.
Okay. Yes.
Question. Good morning. Good morning. Ken Burgos from Councilman Palmer's office. You said there was a high demand of self-storage. I mean, I know everyone here probably agrees to that. I just want to know, do you have an outlook on maybe how much self-storage facilities we can see in the Bronx? If you have that kind of analyzed? Because I know in our district we have one area where there are 2 self-storages across from the Bruckner, and we had a developer inquire about a third one across the street. I mean, within 500 feet, they want 3 self-storages. So how much demand is really there, and how much can we potentially see in the coming years, if even without the zoning text amendment or with it?
So we projected growth based on the patterns of the last 10 years, and we didn't necessarily go borough specific, but citywide. On average, there have been 8 self-storage facilities per year citywide, and I think it's fair to say that most of these have been in Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. and it's almost sort of on par between the three boroughs. So we don't think demand will necessarily increase, but since it has been such a growing industry, it's reasonable to think that there will be some more facilities, and that a certain number of facilities will get a small number will get developed every year also in the Bronx. I mean, we're talking always in very small numbers. If we see citywide 8, and now an application has just been filed in Manhattan, so it's not just that. It's not only outside of Manhattan where this is happening.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? I want to thank you for coming in and making this very, as I said before, comprehensive report.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, yes. Okay, just remind me. Our next presentation will be an overview of the Smart Truck Management Plan. We have a presentation by Nicola Memes and Michael Klatsky, the project managers
Good morning.
from the Department of Transportation. Thank you.
We'll let them take the hot seats. Good morning, everyone. I
Good
think
morning,
knows me.
good morning.
Keith Hell, Bronx DOT. And we're joined by Stacy Hodge, who's our director of, here, you sit here.
I'm just going to do a quick introduction. So you finish.
Stacy Hodge, our director of freight, Stacy Hodge, our director of freight mobility for the
Okay.
DOT.
I'm going to say the last presentation will have links to what we're going to talk about. And it is very good that city planning was here and they were talking about truck routes and land use. So as Keith has said, I'm the director of the Office of Freight Mobility. The Office of Freight Mobility was started in 2007 as a recommendation out of the New York City truck study. A key recommendation from that study was that we should have an office in the city focused on freight. And so I was the first person appointed to take on that role. And since then, we've grown to about 13 people. The truck routes were first installed in the city in the 1980s. So our office pretty much tries to manage that. We make changes to it as land uses change or needs change. So we work very closely with city planning because freight and land use need to come together. They need to work together. When they're in conflict, that's when we get phone calls. So the conversation you have just had with city planning is very dear to us because we're happy to hear that they're thinking about truck routes and they're thinking about industrial business zones because that's where a lot of these conflicts can happen when land uses don't work and there are homes right across the street from a facility using 53-foot trailers. So Keith knows all about this stuff. So we work very closely with all of the other agencies such as Port Authority, Economic Development Corporation, the state DOT, the buildings, Department of Buildings, DEP for noise. There's a lot of things. So the team that's here today are just one of 4 teams that I lead at DOT. Now that we've had the increase in staff, we have folks who work on commercial compliance, commercial vehicle compliance, so they work closely with the police on the enforcement of compliance with trucks on the truck route. We have a team focused on efficient deliveries. They want to reduce the double parking of trucks. You may notice that we have a lot more people in the city and a lot more people are buying things online. That means a lot more trucks are coming and trucks are going to places they didn't normally go. We partner with the private sector. UPS shared data with us and showed that there was a 27% increase in truck deliveries to residential areas in a 5-year period. So we at DOT, who have to manage the curb, would not have had truck loading areas in some of those areas because maybe 10 years ago we weren't buying all of this stuff online. Now we have to address all of this truck traffic that is actually going now to residential areas, dropping off parcels. We also had industry come to us and say we need a level playing field for those truckers who don't want to comply with truck weight rules. If I'm going after a job and it's a construction job and I bid on it, the person who's going to drive the truck overweight can underbid me for that contract. Can you do something about that? So we teamed with the state and the Port Authority, and we built 3 weigh-in-motion sites. One of them is on Alexander Hamilton Bridge, that all of these trucks are coming in from Jersey, and we're now collecting the weight of trucks as they travel in real time at 3 sites in the city. And we'll be working on figuring out what do we do now that we have this information. That will be a study coming out. So the freight team here that's going to present to you today, a lot of what the office is doing in our 4 different teams, and the 4th team is signage, truck route signage, and ITS, will be incorporated in this new plan since we haven't had one since 2007. They've been doing a lot of outreach in all the boroughs so we can hear from the communities and hear from industry, and by the end of the year we will have a plan. But know that we're not doing this in a vacuum. We're doing it with all of the other agencies who have jurisdiction on some of the things that are key to finding a way to mitigate the impacts of trucks. So I will turn it over now to 2 of our project managers in the office who are responsible for delivering this plan, for taking the data that we've been collecting, because we've been collecting data on the truck routes all over the city, and we've been getting crash analysis and other information from other agencies. So I'm going to turn it over to Nicola Mames and Michael Klatsky. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. So I'm just going to start off, do an introduction of the study, and then Michael will go into a lot of the more specific details of what we're thinking about for the Bronx. So as Stacy had mentioned, there's quite a lot of people in New York City, residents and tourists, over 8 million residents, over 60 million tourists, and over 4.5 million jobs, and all of those people need stuff. There's also a significant increase in residential deliveries, so not only are we seeing more freight traffic, we're seeing it in less traditional areas than previously, where they're not just going to industrial areas, they're going to residential areas, and we need to start planning for that. Of all the things coming into the city, because we demand it, most of it is carried by truck. Over 90% of goods are delivered by truck in New York City. So we need to plan for that truck freight, and with the increase coming and the changes coming in the industry, we need to start thinking about what we can do, and that's why we're sort of starting this plan, thinking about the long term. Another important point to think about is that we all know that there's congestion in the city, but trucks are also, they contribute to congestion, but they're also impacted by congestion, and there's costs associated with that, and those costs are often, shifted to the consumer, where the consumer is paying more for goods that are coming in because it's a lot more difficult to get it to where it needs to be. So what we're doing is we're trying to improve goods movement in the city now and in the future. So we're looking at existing conditions and also forward-looking to the future and what's coming in the industry and the changes that are happening. So thinking about the future, we have data from 2012. Our regional planning entity, NIMTEC, did an analysis showing sort of the breakdown by mode. For trucks, over 300 million goods were coming in by truck in 2012, and they did a projection to 2045, estimating over 500 million goods are going to be coming in by truck in the New York metropolitan area. So that's not just New York City, it's the New York City area and the nine surrounding counties. So that's quite a significant increase. It's not exactly double, but it's getting there, and these are projections, so there's going to be, I can guarantee you these numbers will change a lot, especially with the expanding e-commerce industry, so we have to start thinking about this. We are also looking at existing plans that are in place for the city. We need to align ourselves with our DOT plan, the strategic plan that came out in 2016, which has a freight chapter, but also the other city plans thinking about equitable development and environmental sustainability. So as we work on our plan, we are also referencing these existing plans to make sure that we are doing a comprehensive analysis and also an analysis that takes into account everything that has been published by the city. We came up with a vision for our plan, so our plan is called the Smart Truck Management Plan because we control the streets in the city, so we manage the truck freight. And the vision essentially is enhance the economic vitality and quality of life for all New Yorkers by providing for the safe, efficient, and environmentally responsible movement of goods. It's pretty comprehensive, and it's just our guiding principle for what we have to think about as we plan for truck freight in the city. So again, our goals are to develop a comprehensive strategy for the city, provide for a better vision for freight management, and improve the understanding of truck route usage and compliance, movement of goods, the needs of shippers and receivers, so we can require that shippers ship at a certain time, but we also have to understand that there's a business need and not all businesses can accommodate that. So we have to think about how we can work with the industry and also the businesses in New York City so that they can work compatibly, and also the community. And that's why we're here today and why we have been going out to the community asking for feedback on what they experience every day with truck freight in the city. So the overall process, as you know, there's a wide range of issues and challenges. We have multi-stakeholder engagement. We have working groups where we discuss specific topics. We have regional coordination, as Stacy had mentioned. We're looking at other agencies that have also developed freight plans, the state freight plan and also the NIMTIC freight plan, and other agencies within the city that are thinking about freight and planning for freight and working with them to understand how we can improve goods movement. And that is not just thinking about trucks, it's thinking about all freight modes and trying to integrate them better and possibly offsetting to other modes where possible so not everything is carried by truck. And ultimately we'll come up with a comprehensive freight strategy, which will be our smart truck management plan. Our timeline, we started in the winter of 2016. We started with a lot of stakeholder engagement. We are in the process of gathering data and doing analysis, looking at existing conditions. That's where we are now. And we're also sort of ending our first round of community engagement where we went to all the boroughs, many different communities in the boroughs, talking about what we're trying to do and what we should think about as we plan for freight in New York City and freight in each of the boroughs. We're going to have another round of community engagement in the fall where we will talk about the recommendations that we've developed and sort of try and design them so that they make sense for the city but also for the boroughs specifically. And then at the end of the year, we hope to release a comprehensive plan. And then once we have that plan in place, we will start implementing our strategies. Looking from short term to long term, what is most feasible in the short term and what's more feasible in the long term. So just our guiding principles for the broad topics that we have to think about as we plan, we are considering safety, congestion reduction, environmental sustainability, compliance monitoring, so not only regulating trucks, but also making it so that they want to comply and choose to comply, so that we're not relying so much on enforcement strategies. Freight efficiency, supporting more efficient goods movement, partnerships with the industry, but also with the community, and infrastructure and asset management so that we can make sure that our roadways are not getting damaged. So now I'll turn it over to Michael, who will talk about some of the specifics in the Bronx.
Thank you, Nicola. So my name is Michael Klatsky, and I want to talk about a little bit about the specific issues that I think come up in the Bronx that you may be interested in. With regard to the freight plan, we've done some background research, and we want to present some of that to you today so you understand what we know so far, and perhaps toward the end of the presentation, you can help fill out some of those blanks. So I'll start with freight flows in the city. As you know, the Bronx is a key freight corridor for New York City and Long Island and New England. You can see the flow going through the Cross Bronx. It's a key freight corridor for all the goods that everyone in Brooklyn and Queens and Manhattan receives, everyone in Long Island, as well as through traffic going towards New England and as well in the opposite direction. Now, this is not just one industry. It's basically everyone depends on this flow. So it's residential, it's retail, commercial like office buildings, industrial facilities, even things like utilities like Con Edison plants. They receive goods that come over this flow. So it's a critical flow basically for the region's vitality, and the Bronx, I guess, bears much of that. So we want to just kind of put that up front. With regard to air quality, which is I think the biggest concern for us when it comes to truck management in the Bronx, is there's heavy congestion on the Bronx key freight corridor. So that leads to some health issues. There's limited alternate routes. Really, that's because of the nature of the topography. There's some hills. We don't have through truck routes other than a few key arteries that go east to west. Regional land use patterns throughout New York City as well as the suburbs as well as New Jersey and New England have developed an entire framework of industrial activity around the Bronx freight network, and this is just something that we kind of want. This is some background information that we've we've kind of identified this, so we just want to kind of put this out there just right away. Some current initiatives that DOT has done over the past couple of years to try to improve that is the Hunts Point Clean Truck Program, which is an incentive-based program for trucks operating Hunts Point Market to upgrade to more efficient, emissions-friendly vehicles. So like they have hybrid electric trucks and things like that, newer engines. We have increased enforcement of off-route trucks, so those trucks that do leave the Cross Bronx and cut through various neighborhoods, we've been working with the NYPD to have better enforcement of those. And we have a citywide effort to reduce congestion, because when you have that acute congestion at certain times of the day, trucks just sit there for hours with exhaust. So we want to kind of distribute that over a longer period of time. So we have trucks that just pass through faster and don't sit there with emissions. So some of our larger initiatives are off-route studies. Our office has an initiative to look at areas where trucks cut through residential areas. We've done quite a few of these throughout the city. We look at a package of strategies, both working with the police department as well as design options, and we work with some of the industry to understand why they're taking this route and see if we can kind of look for more of like the symptomatic reasons behind it. One issue that we've come up across is that truck signage that we have is not great in some of the locations. Truckers come across a situation where they don't know where to continue, and then they just kind of make up a route on their own. So we've been going out. Our commercial vehicle compliance team has spent the past few months taking an inventory of all the truck signs in the city. They've located all the existing ones that are there, all the ones that exist, but the signs are, I guess the location exists, but the sign's missing. They've identified those, and we're putting together a strategy with the borough engineering offices of DOT to remedy that situation. We also want to look at bridge strikes. A lot of the overpasses around the city, as well as the subway infrastructure, gets hit by trucks that aren't sure where to go. And that really comes under that sign inventory question. And then when that happens, obviously a truck hits a subway overpass or a bridge, and it just creates a situation that no one's happy with. Compliance monitoring, as Stacy mentioned earlier, we have a virtual truck weigh station at the Alexander Hamilton Bridge. If you're not familiar with this bridge, it connects Trans-Manhattan Expressway with the Cross Bronx. It's a key corridor between Manhattan and the Bronx. All the trucks coming to and from the Bronx from New Jersey must take this route. So we've put it there at basically at the upper level where all the trucks are, and at the upper level of the George Washington Bridge ramp. So every single truck that comes into the Bronx from the west gets tracked by us, as well as trucks leaving. And we have a new dedicated commercial vehicle compliance team that is looking to find strategies to deal with that. We want to also encourage more low emissions vehicles, so we're looking at creating a recognition program where that if your company goes out and gets lower emission vehicles, the city will recognize that, give you kind of like a certificate that people can show that we're recognizing that you're doing something good for the community. So outreach so far. So we're meeting today, basically to meet with you. We've had an open house at the points in the Hunts Point section of the Bronx. We've got some good feedback at that meeting. That's where it's the community where Hunts Point Market's located. They have a lot of very acute truck issues because it's where all the food from New York City comes in and out of. We're having a round 2 towards the end of the summer, perhaps in September, to have a workshop with the public to kind of where we can go on. We can present some of our strategies and get some feedback, and then we'll have a third later round in the fall where we will go and present some of our recommendations. Some of the key deliverables that we're looking to achieve by the end of the year is a freight plan for each borough, which looks at borough-specific issues, as well as a citywide freight plan that ties them all together and also looks at issues that some of them are cross-borough issues, particularly in Brooklyn and Queens, the Newtown Creek area, as well as issues as kind of like citywide policy issues. And so one way that everyone can stay involved and really tell us some of the things, because we have limited time to meet with everyone around the city, so we've created a feedback portal, which is similar to some of the other portals that DOT's created in the past, where we have a map that you can click on your constituents and can go there and identify specific issues in their neighborhoods, click on the map, pinpoint it, tell us what it is, and we'll receive it on our end. We have a survey as well. The link is on the bottom, but we have all this put together on a website. If you go to nyc.gov/trucks, there's a link to all of this information as well. And I'll turn it over to Keith and Stacy and Nicola so we can kind of address any questions you might have.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very intense presentation. Are there any questions or comments regarding the plan? Yes, James?
Hi, James Rouse, Plan Development Director for the Borough President. Thank you for that presentation. Anything to get more trucks off the street or moving quicker, I think most folks here are generally in favor of. Just a couple questions. You talked about the low emission vehicles recognition program. Could you expound on that? What does that mean, recognition program? How does it encourage the purchase of lower emission vehicles, and are there incentives being provided to encourage the purchase of lower emission vehicles?
I think at the moment, the way we're envisioning the program is that similar to getting an A for a restaurant, is that they can simply display that they are a green, sustainable provider of goods and services.
Yeah, I can expand on that. It's essentially like a recognition scheme that the city says, you know, you are complying with safety, compliance, and emission standards, and we recognize you to be a good shipper, and businesses hopefully will be more likely to use you as the delivery company for their goods and products. And it's just essentially making it more of a participatory compliance strategy as opposed to a regulatory compliance strategy.
Would they be required to display anything that says they recognize, like whether it's an A, B, or C, or just a certificate? And,
yes.
And where would it be? Would it be at the business, or would it be on the trucks themselves?
So those details I don't have, but it's essentially just a program where it would be visible, and you would know that they are a participating vendor in the program. And a lot of other cities have done this, and so we're trying to develop a model for New York City that would work for what we need in this city.
And the other question I have is, to what extent are other modes of transportation, freight transportation, taken into account? And is there any encouragement or recognition for companies who will be willing to diversify their freight shipments more?
I can pass that off to you.
So one of the issues that we've been finding so far is that we've spent the past 75 years basically going all in on trucks. We've dismantled a lot of our freight rail infrastructure around the city, and one of the key issues is that even if we were to rebuild connections to New Jersey and the National Freight Rail Network, we'd have nowhere to unload 100-car trains in New York City at the moment. So we're taking very small steps, but basically we don't think it's feasible to really have a large mode shift to rail. We think that for waterfront businesses, we want to try to encourage some more barge shipments. But I know that everyone has been thinking about, we're a rail city. Well, everyone gets around with rail when it comes to passenger travel, but when it comes to goods and cargo, we don't really do that as much. And that's the key issue is we've taken every rail yard in Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx and developed on them. And because of that, we don't really think it's realistic within the time frame of our plan to achieve that.
So let me add to that, the economic development corporation.
You have to talk into the mic.
There you go.
Right here.
The Economic Development Corporation will be looking at the other modes. DOT is primarily rubber tire. So from our commissioner, we've been told to make sure this freight plan addresses the rubber tire, which is 90% of the issues. EDC is doing a freight plan. They're coordinating with our team. They're going to do the water and the rail, aviation. So there's a lot of other modes, but that's in their jurisdiction. So we'll be collaborating with them because we would love to see some mode shift, but this team is rubber tire.
And I also just want to go back to your previous question about the low emissions vehicles. That's certainly going to be a consideration where we want to encourage that. But we also have the Hunts Point Clean Trucks program, which is branded as the Hunts Point Clean Trucks program. But in our alternative fuels group, they want to expand it to other industrial areas. So not just in Hunts Point, where we want to look at where there's a need to encourage, diesel to diesel conversion for newer trucks, or shifting to alternative fuels so that the emissions are reduced and the impacts on the community are improved for truck emissions.
Mr. Hall?
Hi, I'm Bill Hall from Community Board 12. I just want to point out, in our district, we have a particular block called Provost Avenue, and that's right between the Boston Road and that I-95 corridor. And it seems like every truck in the city goes through Provost Avenue. We have 20 houses. There's a residential area with 20 houses. And I'd like you to kind of pay attention to that area and maybe possibly some regulation that may reduce the traffic, if possible, reroute that truck traffic, because it's horrendous, not only to the environment, but also to the roadway. And the other issue is I think that it's kind of dangerous because the trucks are moving back and forth. We have residents that cross that street consistently, and it's really kind of dangerous. The other request I have is if you would come to our community board sometime next fall and give a presentation as well. So, thank you.
Do you want to answer whether you can come to the committee?
You can definitely engage with us through our the Bronx DOT office to set up that presentation. But we will be going out to the community in September with a workshop style where we will be going into the details of the strategies that we hope to propose and hope to get a lot of feedback of that. And the feedback you just gave, a specific road that we have to look at, is what we're looking for. And if you and the other community board members and the community can go on our feedback portal, and you can go on the map, there's a feedback map, and you can actually click on a location and explain what the issue is, and we can definitely take a look at that. And that's going to be really useful for us as we work on our borough-specific plans.
We're aware of the concerns about Provost, and we're looking at it.
Okay. Roberto?
I just want to follow up with James' questions. At the Hunts Point Clean Truck Program, we've retrofitted about 500 trucks in the last 4 or 5 years, which is, they have been giving us updates regarding that. We're also working on getting the alternative fuel station located in the industrial zone. And we've been encouraging to, we have in the peninsula the capacity for more rail and barge. So we've been encouraging that. And we know that EDC just allocated money to the produce market, and they just recently upgrading their rail system. So it's something that, from the community board's point, we've been encouraging to decrease the amount of trucks and retrofit the trucks that we currently have, and we have the capacity for more rail and barge. So I've been following up with DOT with that. So.
And the impacts of that program are region-wide. We've seen, we track the trucks that participate in the program as part of the compliance of the program, and they go as far north as Boston and as far south as Baltimore. So it's not just improving the quality of life in the Bronx, but also improving the quality of life in the surrounding area, which reaches further than just the Hunts Point industrial business zone.
Victoria first.
Good morning. I'm wondering if any...
Is that on?
I'm wondering if any consideration has been made towards thinking about truck lanes, as truck traffic is proposed to increase at such a high rate, and as trucks disproportionately contribute to pollution when idling. Is this something that's been considered or is being considered at all?
Yeah. I mean, we'd love to have your support for that. We think that's, we think that idling is a serious problem when it comes to congestion, and ways to get trucks through faster, or any way to get trucks through faster is a good thing. And I guess the key questions come up to, can our network support that without having adverse impacts across the board? And that's something that we hope to study.
As part of the idling problem, there are technologies that allow trucks to idle with their, or to operate with their engines off so that they're not idling, especially refrigerated trucks, so they're not, emitting while they're sitting there. So we're thinking about those technologies to improve emissions while a truck is making a delivery. But like Michael said, if you feel strongly about the truck lanes, we can certainly have a conversation about that and look into possibilities. But there is constrained capacity on the streets, and we can't, designate truck lanes all over the city, but we can think about strategies to locate areas where trucks primarily operate.
And are there any concrete plans for a study of that at this time?
For truck lanes?
Yes.
Well, it's something we're coming to you because we need to think about, a lot of different strategies. So that's something we can consider as part of our process.
Thank you.
Dan?
Yeah, I had a question. With your plan, do you anticipate coming forward with specific regulations with enforcement measures, or is it more of a kind of a good guy policy that you're looking at?
Good guy and regulations. So we're going to think about what we can do to encourage compliance, but also to, monitor it when it happens.
Are you looking at restricting hours of trucks within the city, or even retrofitting by a certain year for trucks?
So the Clean Trucks program is trying to retrofit to 2007 engines. Restricting trucks in the city is not necessarily something that we're considering because it's very hard to do that. Businesses can only receive goods during certain times, but we are engaging with businesses to do off-hour deliveries when possible. I do want to point out that that's not applicable everywhere. It's context sensitive and also business sensitive, but we have an entire group unit in our office that's thinking about how we can encourage trucks to come in the off hour so that they're not, sitting in congestion and idling and causing greater emissions.
And just lastly, enforcement, will that be through NYPD or through a separate DOT unit?
So enforcement is handled by NYPD, but our commercial vehicle compliance team has a task force with NYPD where we help them identify hotspots where they can go and do targeted enforcement because of their limited resources. So we're coordinating with them to see how we can better allocate the resources that are available to us so that we can improve enforcement that way.
Okay, thank you, Nicole.
Okay, George.
So I was just curious, congestion pricing always seems to be a non-starter. And I think we've taken a bite out of that apple twice, but I think that this might encourage, because I know it's not doubling by 2045, but I don't see how you get trucks off the road. I mean, I think to Dan's point, it's an enforcement issue, and maybe you have to put some sort of pricing mechanisms to encourage people to, stay off the road. So I don't know if that's something that DOT is considering implementing again. And the only other point that I would say about off-hour deliveries, I've worked in the city for a very long time, and I'm now a district manager. And one of the complaints that I get all the time is noise. And the idea that you would push off-hour deliveries would suggest that when people are coming home, or hours that people would be home relaxing, would not be a good thing for the city. I mean, it might be a good thing for those businesses, and it might be good for the trucks because they're more free-flowing, there are less people out on the street, but you exactly want deliveries between 9 and 5 when people are at work and they're not home. So again, I don't know how you mitigate that, because again, I've lived in districts and I represent a district that's right underneath the train station, and people complain all the time about a truck making a delivery at 3 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock in the afternoon or evening. So again, I know that that's you're encouraging that sort of thing, but again, I don't know how that sort of works in practice, because you're raising a whole nother issue. I think congestion pricing might be the way to go, but again, I know that that's been a non-starter in the state.
Okay, so let me say this. There's no one strategy that's going to get us out of congestion. So we're not going to say this one policy or this one policy is the solution. We have been studying off-hour deliveries since about 2007, but it is not new. It's being used all over the world. And I'd want you to know that New York City actually is one of the leaders in having studied this, and we have taken an incremental approach. We have not tried to ram this in, right? Because we are cognizant of noise, and we've been working closely with DEP. So the program is small right now. We've been doing this with no complaints. because we asked the truckers who are doing it to use noise mitigation strategies and a specific code of conduct. Now, there are people out there doing off-hour deliveries who've never talked to us. So we can't speak for every trucker who's doing it, but there's people doing this right now and doing it without making noise. But just like in any business, there's going to be people who don't want to invest in the right equipment or invest in their people and take advantage of the fact that there's not enough officers or enough DEP folks to be there to catch them doing something. So our team is trying to do this in a respectful, incremental way, which is why we did not scale up this program since 2007, when we might have been being able to push for that. Why? Because we've been wanting to study the noise monitoring strategy, and we are DOT. That's DEP. Now you're in someone else's sandbox. So you have to slow it down and make sure you're going there together. And what we've done this past year is we did a pilot of noise monitoring in Soho, where there was a business doing off-hour deliveries, following no rules and making a lot of noise. So we had to go in there, we put in cameras and noise meters and studied them for about a month, what was going on that block. Because our vision for when we do roll out off-hour in a larger manner is there will be a website with noise monitoring equipment at the sites where this is happening so that we and DEP can better respond to it. I live in the Bronx. I see a lot of these issues of trucks hitting things, trucks coming at night, but that's where we come in. There's always going to be someone who doesn't want to follow rules, but there's a lot of them who do want to follow the rules. The city has given us $2.4 million to institute the equipment we need to do a curb management monitoring with cameras and noise meters on a small scale in an area where we really want to focus in on this, and that's the approach we're taking. The team is going through procurement. If you work in government, you know that takes forever. We're going through the procurement strategies to get that equipment in place, and then once that's done successfully, we can replicate that strategy in other parts of the city where we want to do off-hour, but it can be done. We were just given an award in May for our work in off-hour deliveries because it is a really phenomenal way to deal with operations. But it does require the players and the public to work together, because there's always going to be someone who doesn't want to do things the right way. But it can be done.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions, comments? Seeing none, I want to thank you all for coming in and giving us this report. It's very good, and we look forward to continuing to work with you.
And if you can go online, give us feedback, have community members and other community board members give us feedback, we would really appreciate that.
The next topic that we're going to be addressing is the Bronx Empire State Poverty Reduction Initiative. We have a presentation by Abe Fernandez from the Children Aid Society. Good morning, Abe.
Good morning. Many thanks for the opportunity to update this group on a really exciting initiative called the Empire State Poverty Reduction Initiative. It's ESPRI for short. My name is Abe Fernandez. I'm the Director of Collective Impact at the Children's Aid Society. And just want to take a moment to share a little bit about just the background of what this initiative is, some current work that's underway, some planning work that's happening, and also an ask for folks around this table as a way to advance the work that we're in the middle of right now. So first, some background on ESPRI. This is an initiative that is statewide. The Bronx is joining 15 other communities around the state that are developing and implementing plans that will reduce poverty among New Yorkers. In every one of those communities, there is a designator, typically the mayor of that city or the county executive, or in our case, it was the borough president, and that designator has a responsibility of choosing a nonprofit to coordinate the work. And we are pleased and privileged that the borough president selected Children's Aid. I'm assuming partly because of our long-standing work citywide. We've been in New York City for 164 years. I have not been the entire time, but a good chunk of that, as well as about 20 years now doing direct service work in the Bronx, Crotona Park East in particular. We also are one of two organizations, so Children's Aid and Phipps Neighborhoods have been co-leading an initiative called South Bronx Rising Together, which is a collective impact initiative focused on providing supports for children from birth all the way through college and career to ensure that they are successful and that we can create a community of infinite opportunity in the Bronx. And so I think that this, to us, is an exciting opportunity to extend that work to other parts of the borough. The grant itself, the initiative, is being administered through the New York State Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, OTDA, and the Department of State, which is helping with the AmeriCorps component I'll talk more about. But just to give you a little bit of context, here are the other 15 communities across the state that are a part of ESPRI. The top three are communities that have been doing this a little bit longer. So this initiative was announced by the governor in his State of the State in January of last year, 2016, really building on the work that got started in Rochester and is now then in the last year or so has expanded to Binghamton and Syracuse, and now there are 16 total communities that are engaged in this work. As far as resources, it's $25 million that has been allocated by the State Assembly. 2.75 of that is allocated for the Bronx. In addition to those financial resources, there's also an important opportunity to engage our residents, we certainly hope, through the New York State Empire Corps. So there are two parts of the AmeriCorps program that are touching down to this initiative. One is the AmeriCorps Vista program. This is Volunteers in Service to America. It's a full-time volunteer who gets an education credit, but also a year-long experience providing capacity building and just a really important opportunity for them to build some skills, but also to contribute to the work that we're doing. And also 6.5 what are called member service years, but basically full-time equivalents of AmeriCorps members. And our hope is that hasn't quite started yet. I'll talk more about that. But the hope is that we can have Bronxites really take advantage of these opportunities to support the work. There's also technical assistance and peer learning as a result of this initiative. There's a promise of some state-level data to inform our work. And recently, the state announced $35 million statewide in additional after-school programming targeted to these 16 communities. So it's still not clear how it's going to touch down in the Bronx, but there's a portion of that $35 million that will be used to support additional after-school programming in this borough. Brooklyn is also a part of that list, but the Bronx, as part of ESPRI, is certainly a beneficiary of that resource. I won't go through every single contract requirement here from the state, but this one I think is really important, that there is a 30% MWBE, minority and women-owned business requirement, and that 15% of all the discretionary money that we receive needs to go to a minority-owned business and 15% to a women-owned business. We added our own internal requirement that we wanted it to be a Bronx MWBE. And I have to say, part of the concern is that if you look at the list of Bronx MWBEs registered with the state, it is not a very long list. And so already we're seeing some real potential in terms of how this work could make an impact on the borough. One of those could be just to get more of our businesses that are minority and women-owned to get registered and hopefully become eligible for this and other state and city contracts. So already we're seeing some signs of some low-hanging fruit where we can make a difference. So if you're working with these folks or have interest in that, we'd love to continue that conversation with you as well. There are 2 phases to the initiative. Phase 1 is what we're in the middle of right now. It's a planning phase. One of the, I think, really important features of how this work is unfolding is that there were no preconceived notions from the state or from the borough president about how this would unfold, and that there's a real commitment that the community itself needs to be engaged in determining how this work will actually, what will actually happen under this initiative. And so we are taking that very seriously, and we are engaging the community very directly in both understanding what we mean by poverty, in trying to understand what seems to have worked, in pulling together recommendations from the community, and ultimately having a plan developed that really reflects exactly what we heard from members of the borough, particularly those who are living in poverty in the Bronx. Once we have a plan in place, and we anticipate having that released this summer, then we would shift into implementation. And so roughly August 2017 to May 2019. I don't think we're going to eradicate poverty by May of 2019 in the Bronx. It'd be great if we did. I do think we will have figured out a couple of really important strategies. And the way that I'm thinking about this work is that this grant of $2.75 million is really a down payment for this borough to really think about how do we structure some work in the longer term, but use this gift, use this opportunity to do things that we've never been able to do before, and to really be creative and strategic in how we implement this initiative. So as far as phase 1, there is an anti-poverty task force that we are developing. There are other communities around the state that have decided to choose somewhere between 20 and 25 people who will speak for the entire community in determining what the work will look like. I think given the size of the Bronx and given the complexity and the diversity of this borough, we're taking a slightly different approach. Instead, we're saying anyone who wants to be part of the task force can be a part of the task force. And so we have a number of engagements that we've set up, and there'll be more to come, where anyone can really participate. There's also a smaller steering committee, which is chaired by the borough president, that will be taking all these recommendations and ultimately making decisions about what we're hearing from members of the task force. But we think it's really important to have at least 2 tiers of engagement opportunity to make sure we're hearing from as many stakeholders as possible. Obviously, there is no guarantee that we'll get another grant from the state. And so sustainability planning is also a key part of what we're starting to do right now. So in engaging as many, city and state and also private philanthropy in sharing what this work looks like and trying to engage those people as early as possible. There's a tremendous amount of data collection we've been doing as well. And one of the key areas of the work is not just what we will do, but where we will do it. It's not possible to do this in every single corner in every single neighborhood of the Bronx. And so we have to be really thoughtful and strategic about where do we start. And so it's not just what will we do. The question is also where will we do it? What does it make most sense? And not that we'll never get to another part of the borough if we don't start there, but how do we build an opportunity to really showcase what's possible and then create a platform of success that we can build on in the future. So in terms of data, there has been a significant amount of work already done on collecting information about the Bronx. Again, I think we're in a bit of a we have a bit of a advantage because, well, I'm not sure if it's really an advantage, but the Bronx, poverty in the Bronx has been studied many, many times, and so we don't need to commission a new study about what's happening here. Instead, the approach we're taking is to look at compiling all of the existing information we have and trying to extract some additional value and again, engage the community directly in interpreting what that data means. What's the story behind those numbers? And so just to share a couple of examples of that, I think this will not be a surprise to most people in this room, that the concentration of poverty in the Bronx really is in the southern part of the borough. And so, this is a little bit dated, but you can see that there, the darker the blue here, the more there's a concentration of poverty. It's important to note that of all 16 communities that are involved in the ESPRI initiative, someone from the state recently came to one of our meetings and quickly determined that the Bronx has a larger population than all the other 15 combined, all the other 15 communities combined. And so when we're still getting about the same amount of money as the top 4 populated communities. So again, we have to be incredibly strategic about how we leverage this investment. But I just also want to recognize that there is a lot of work to be done, and so it's going to take some discipline and some real leadership to think about how best to start this work or continue this work. It's probably more accurate. A more recent report that came out of CEO and City Hall, which we shared with a number of stakeholders. So this is essentially a list of the poverty rate among different community districts in the borough. And there was some surprise for some people that 3, 4, 5, and 6, I mean 5 and 6 in particular, I think people were surprised to see being at the top of, having the highest rates of poverty. A lot of folks expected 1 and 2 to be in that place. And so again, this is not about rubbernecking and sort of, lamenting why things are so horrible, but instead, let's be really sort of clear about what's happening, what the numbers are telling us, and then try to unpack what that number means. What's the story behind what's going on there? What are the trends that we're seeing? What has the movement been? And how might that somehow inform what action could look like going forward? Ultimately, we are thinking about how to implement this work by focusing on particular community districts. I mentioned earlier that Children's Aid and FIPS neighborhoods have been working very directly in CD3 with South Bronx Rising Together. And we've learned a lot in the last 4 years about how to engage the community in ways that make sense and to do it in a way that is at the right level of engagement with the community district. It's possible, and we think likely at this point, that part of what this initiative looks like in reality is choosing another set of community districts to employ a similar strategy. So taking what we've learned about what the community tells us the plan should focus on, but using the community district geography as a way to implement that work. And I'm happy to sort of talk more about that if there are questions. It's still being developed, but I think that's at least directionally where we think we're going. A couple of updates. We were able to identify a VISTA who was started in late April and has been already providing a tremendous amount of capacity to this work. We, however, have an opportunity of bringing on 7 part-time AmeriCorps members by this August. And so if there are members of your community, if you have constituents who you think would be really good fits for this, who could use a little money for education, either that's already been, it can be used retroactively for education or it can be used for future education expenses, this would be a good opportunity. We'd love to get in front of those people. We've also have brought on board Citizens Committee for Children, who is a very well-respected nonprofit research firm here in New York City. You've probably seen their reports before. They have put in a tremendous amount of time pulling together data for this initiative. So this is actually, what I have here is just a pretty comprehensive compilation of the data that we've been looking at. I'll sort of pass it down if you want to leaf through it, but it gives you a sense of just how much information we're looking at. And I would have made copies for all, but that would have been a lot of paper. I can, however, email it to you if you're interested. There's lots of community district-specific information in there that might be of interest. In early May, on Friday, May 5, we had at Metropolitan College a day-long planning institute. And we were really excited to bring in close to 100 people to spend an entire day with us looking at that same data that you're leafing through and coming up with a number of solutions. So the objectives of that day were to really interpret the data. We're not just blindly looking at information and saying, here's what the spreadsheet says, let's go. We want to make sure that, help us connect the dots. What are the points of overlap here? What are the points of intersection? What are some questions that we don't have data for that we can go out and maybe get some more information about? And we want to put that in the hands of people who know this borough well. The way we've been talking about this is that if you live in, if you labor in, or if you love the Bronx, we want to hear from you. We need your input in helping us to figure out how this works. We want to identify barriers. And ultimately, we want to get as many recommendations from Bronx sites as possible, whether you live here or live here, whether you live here or work here, rather. And at this point, more is more. So far, we've received over 200 recommendations as a result of that one day and a couple of other conversations that have happened since. And even though it's a lot to sort of work through, the idea is that we want to see what themes emerge out of that. There are already some themes we're going to share in a minute that I think are really important to look at and to continue testing out with members of the community. It's a hard thing to talk about poverty, and so with one conversation, so we've been able to, with the help of Citizens Committee, sort of break it down into 7 buckets of conversation, and I won't read them to you. They're on the screen here. And obviously, these all intersect and overlap to a certain extent. It's difficult to talk about employment without talking about education, for example, or to talk about health without talking about housing, for example. But it's also really useful to have folks drill down into one of these categories and to help us sort of extract some truth or some insights that maybe wouldn't come from just a service level conversation about poverty. So during the Planning Institute, we were able to give people a chance to really engage directly with the data. There were a number of boards throughout the room where folks can look at the data, they can sort of put up their own comments. Here's an example of a board that was focused on health and wellness. Folks stuck with us the entire day. We were really pleased by that. And there was, lots of very engaged conversation about what this means for them as residents or for people who work in the borough, who live in the borough and work in the borough. Again, this is not, I don't expect you to be able to see every single name on this slide here, but there are a number of nonprofits and other elected offices that were represented in the room and government agencies that were in the room. We were excited to get that kind of engagement from folks. And so the big takeaways that we got out of that one day is that, first of all, most recommendations came out of the group that was focused on identifying community resources to support residents, those living in poverty in the Bronx. And that the number one thing that seemed to come up was that, in short, that we are, in some cases, in some places, program rich and system poor. Right? There's lots of stuff out there, lots of people delivering programming and services, but the connection between them isn't so clear all the time. Either whether it's a resident themselves trying to seek out support and programming and other kinds of opportunities, or if it's about helping one nonprofit that's working on housing, find resources to support their clients on another area like education, for example. That's kind of the B2B kinds of connections aren't there either. So that seems to be a trend, a pattern we saw in almost every conversation so far, that there's a real interest in how we build connective tissue between the different resources in the borough. We also planned a second day, so that was a Friday. We're going to do Saturday as well to make it more of a community residence heavy kind of a day, but unfortunately not many folks signed up. So instead of asking folks to come to us, we went with our initial thought about this, and we're doing a series of focus groups around the borough. There was one we did a couple weeks ago in Mott Haven. This is a group of women from Massa and East Side House and United Way. And it was, again, a couple hours in the afternoon on Saturday, and we got lots of similar thoughts. Another sort of set of themes that emerged from that conversation was a real concern around safety. And that we heard, young families avoiding parks and subways due to concerns around drugs and crime. This is particular to Mott Haven and in the hub. A real concern around language barriers. This entire focus group was conducted in Spanish. Also concerns around abusive landlords and using threats of reporting to ICE to somehow, exert influence on residents. And also, again, the importance of having trusted advisors and advocates, people who know the community well and can connect them to what they need to feel supported. I will end, and of course, be happy to take questions, with 2 requests. One is, I've already made one, but the other one is to encourage all of you to identify opportunities in the next month or so where we could come out to your constituents and have a focused conversation about what all this means. We'd love to hear directly from Bronxites, again, in particular those who are living in poverty. We don't just want to have 1 or 2 folks. We want the majority of people who are informing this plan to be the ones who would ostensibly benefit from this work most directly. So that's one. I'm happy to leave information of how to contact me to get that set up. And then secondly, as I mentioned earlier, we are going to start a pretty significant push for recruitment for AmeriCorps members. I would prefer for every one of those folks to be Bronxites. And we'll be doing another round in late fall, but right now there's a more immediate opportunity to get about 7 or so part-time members engaged in this work. And so with that, I will pause for questions and thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That was quite good.
Thank you.
I have a question. You talked about the highest poverty being in boards 3, 4, 5, and 6, if I remember correctly.
That sounds right.
According
to one
reached
measure,
out?
yes.
Excuse me?
According to one measure,
Okay.
one group.
Have
yes.
you reached out to any of the community centers in those areas, in those districts, to be a part of this?
Yeah, so we've put out a pretty broad call to really all of the nonprofits, and to the extent that we can get to them in the communities, with a particular push on, if you look at the data that's making its way around here, community districts 1 through 7 and 9 really have the most concentrated levels of poverty, and so. We've been really focusing on nonprofits and folks who are doing work in those areas. I'm sure there are others that we need to talk to, and so that's why we are taking advantage of these opportunities to get in front of as many people as possible,
Right.
And that there's still time for those groups to have direct participation in the creation of this plan. So even if they weren't there for May 5, we are happy to come out to them and have those conversations.
Okay. And with that, I think I saw Adelaide's hand up first.
Thank you. The chair of Community Board 7, which is your Kingsbridge Heights Marshall area.
Yep.
If you could put it back where you just had it, the
Yep.
screen. I'm concerned because we are 28.1.
Yep.
But you have 3 and 6 together as 32. And so I'm a little confused because we're like off by a point, but then you've combined 2. So I just want to share, you said you did it by one measure. Is that just by income that you did? Because our district is the most overcrowded school district. And that should be another measure you're looking at, because when you're talking about children,
Yep.
we have a lack of enough seats. They're like sitting on top of each other. So if you do that kind of variable, I think, measure, you're going to find that we're going to go way up there.
So let me just clarify a couple of things. First, this is not necessarily only a children-focused initiative. Even though I work for the Children's Aid Society, we may decide this is all about adult unemployment. So that's still sort of being figured out. So I just want to be clear about that. Second, this is really just one report of many reports that we're consulting that Citizens Committee are consulting to see just what's out there that's how can we sort of understand what's going on. So CEO itself put out its own calculation of how they're measuring poverty, and so according to that one report, that's what this screen is really summarizing. This is not my report. I didn't create it, and so it may be that there are nuances to what's here that frankly are not captured in this particular report. And that's why it's not the only one that we're consulting. So if you look at what's going around, that I think is a much more comprehensive view. And it may be that depending on what we decide to focus on, it would sort of completely transform how who we're saying is like the area of priority. So if the focus is more on education, it might go one way. If the focus is more on housing, it might go in a different direction. So this is really just to give an example of the kinds of information that are informing the plan at this point.
The concern I have is if I'm overcrowded school-wise, that means if I have a family has an income of $25,000 and they have 4 children, that's going to make a big difference versus somebody living alone. So I don't know exactly what all the measures are, but that needs to be tallied in there somehow. And if so, I would like my district to definitely be included in this study. And I'd like to know how soon you can come out, because right now we've closed shop for our committee meetings. So if you want us to help you bring presentations out, then we have to enroll those who can be available, enroll those in the community. We need to know how we can best support you as boards. I mean, this is a good place to start with us, because I would have liked to know when you had those meetings. Many of us may want to have gone and just shared our input there.
Yeah.
So let us know, and I'm glad you're here today to share this with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And again, I'd love to follow up on both the data conversation. So if you want to take a look at, I mean, CD7 was certainly in that packet, right? And it is one of the high poverty districts that we're focusing on. And so if there are other pieces of information that are not in there that we should be looking at, I am very happy to get that and loop it in. And then also, if there are opportunities to get in front of some folks in the next few weeks, even if it's a handful of people, we still think that that's really valuable insights that we want to incorporate. So thank you.
Mr. Hall.
Hi, I'm Bill Hall, Board Chair for 12. Just wanted to make a suggestion. In the middle to late 60s, there was an anti-poverty program in which a number of agencies were developed, HARU-ACT, Neighborhood Youth Corps, and Harlem Youth Unlimited. And I was just want to suggest to you that maybe if that data is available to you, you can take a look at the mistakes they made, the progress they made, and where they went wrong. And I know this is the Bronx, this is 50 years later, but those agencies also did a study and poured money into it, and obviously they weren't successful because we're here 50 years later with the same problem.
Right.
But just wanted to make that suggestion to you.
Point taken. I appreciate that. We'll get to it.
Okay, Roberto.
Thank you for the presentation. I just have a few things. The MWBE, does that apply also to nonprofits?
I believe that a nonprofit is, no, it's not.
Okay.
We could still work with nonprofits, but they
Okay.
wouldn't be counted toward the 15%.
Okay.
That's right.
I think Community Board 2 is going to express interest in being a stakeholder.
Great.
So if you can just share your contact information.
Will do. Actually, the flyer that went around has an email address on it and a website where you can sign up.
Right.
That email goes directly to me.
Oh, this Esprit?
Yep.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Are there any other questions, comments? Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I didn't see you over there. Come to the table, to the microphone.
Good morning. My name is Kajri Chaudhary, and I'm from the New York City Commission on Human Rights. So the focus group, one of the issues that was highlighted was being afraid of abusive landlords and being, being reported. Do you provide resources post-focus group based on the conversations, or is just the focus group a place of conversation? And are the communities being then linked to resources based on what has come out of the focus groups?
I mean, I think that it's a great question. I think that right now, because we are in the formation of a plan, I can't say that we're definitely going to respond to everything we hear about, because there's a lot we're hearing about, right? That said, I have to say it's amazing. Just on the day of the Planning Institute, we heard people who had never met each other, who were doing work in some cases the very same neighborhood, who just by nature of having a conversation on that one day walked out of there with a partnership. So already, even the planning process itself seems to be having some sort of a beneficial impact on what's going on. Again, we're not going to solve all the issues just by having one conversation. But again, we're seeing over and over examples of this really being about connecting people in ways that have not been connected before. And so we have to find ways to do it more efficiently. And if we can really go deep on a particular set of issues that we can measure and show impact, we think that come May of 2019, we're set up to perhaps go back to get some additional resources from the state. Or at that point, my hope is that some city resources will flow, as well as some private philanthropy. So I think there's much more to be done for sure.
Dan?
Just kind of going through this. Are there numbers on age, poverty within age groups?
I believe early in that packet there is a demographic, a set of demographic slides that go into that. If there's something missing, we can always pull it in. Yeah.
Okay, just Because I noticed it wasn't one of the groups, but I'm guessing there's a different plan for each different age group. You
Well,
know?
there's no plan yet, right? This is all just trying to figure out, does it make sense, for example, to focus on early childhood? So I should have said this before. In the example of Rochester, they ended up picking 2 areas of priority. One is to work with adults who are out of work, to get them mentored, to get them, back on their feet, sort of connect them to workforce development strategies and opportunities, and simultaneously focus on early childhood. They don't have UPK in Rochester, so they wanted to fill in that gap. In our case, we might also want to take a 2-generation approach. Whether that's seniors and adults or young children or middle school kids, again, that's going to come out of our conversations. We're not quite at the point where we can say the direction it's going to go yet. But we'd love to consider your ideas on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Tom?
Good morning. Just 2 quick things. The package that you've been sending around is quite comprehensive, and I know emailing that would probably be a very big file, so I don't know if everybody's going to be able to download it, but it is something that I think each of the boards can use, not only for your purposes, but also for their planning purposes as they move forward. The information that you've been sharing with us and with Tracy regarding the locations of meetings and things of that nature, we've been very proactive in sending out to all of the boards. I know you've been to a number of board meetings that I've been at, and you've made presentations directly. So for those boards who do want a presentation, I'm sure Abe, would be available himself, or somebody from his organization would be there. His presentations have always been very concise and clear and very informative. So anybody who's interested, I encourage you to reach out, especially those boards that are highlighted, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
And 7.
And 7. Excuse me. But, Abe is very good at presenting the plan, and I think he would be a great benefit for you to hear from him directly.
Great, thank you. And I should say the Borough President's office has been just tremendously supportive. Tracy in particular has been a real wonderful partner in this work, so thank you.
All right. Adeline?
We were just looking at the age report. It doesn't indicate how many seniors are in the poverty level. I mean, because I have, according to this, 11,000 that are seniors.
Mm-hmm.
I got a feeling it's going to be more because I got huge developments coming in the half a block across the street from me. At least another 1,500 are moving in a half a block. Because the housing development's going up. I think you need to take that into account, that's going to hit us big time.
Yeah.
So all this, it's going to be, and how do we get a copy of this? This may have to be all revamped, like you're saying, as we do outreach, because then I can let you know exactly where the senior developments are coming in, because they're almost done. The one I'm talking about that's got 1,500 more seniors coming in a half a block that already has about 1,000. So it's interesting to see, because I have a lot of seniors who are now, I went to a meeting and one was 102, Mary, and she said her girlfriend's 105 and calls her the baby. So my seniors are living longer, and they want to work. They want to learn about social media, and they're bored. And the more they get involved, the less problems with dementia, and feeling more active and doing something in their lives is important. So I'm looking now to even do community outreach to get them involved more in the boards. But if we can get some studies to find out how many seniors who are retired, who are tired of being retired, and put them back in the workforce, I think that'll change the levels of poverty that we have right now, because a lot of them are living below poverty level.
So that data report is not done, right? We're always adding to it, and so if there are particular studies that are out there, I mean, this building that's coming in, I don't know if there's been some sort of an assessment of what that would mean. We'd love to look at that. The group at Citizens Committee for Children has been just unbelievably resourceful at finding what's out there, but if it's not out there, we don't have it. It's hard for us to incorporate. So please, at the same email address, if you want to contact me there and send me other information we should include, we're happy to do that. Yes, it is a very large file, but we can send you just a link where you can download it right to your machine. So we're happy to do that.
Good. George?
Thank you. Can you define poverty or the age, not the, I'm sorry, everybody's talking about age, the income levels? I'm most interested actually in people I don't want to say like myself, but sort of in my, and people maybe around this table, sort of people who are on the cusp of, they have jobs, but, you know, paying for camp or paying for childcare or any of those things becomes very difficult. A majority of their income goes to paying for rent, and therefore they're maybe food insecure or other things. Because I think one of the frustrating things for me is there are certain populations that are already spoken for. You know, I know Adeline is talking about seniors now, but quite frankly, seniors are taken care of. The youth are taken care of. The whole city dedicated a whole program for UPK. I'm worried about the people who are always overlooked, and those are the people who are working, the working class population that is probably, you know, struggling with 3 or 4 or 5 kids that, you know, they just don't have the resources to pay for things, or they're able to pay their rent, meet those obligations and pay the bills, but you know, maybe they don't have a vehicle, they're living food insecure. What is poverty for you? Are those people who are literally below a certain income level, or are we looking at a much broader population where, you know, people who live in the Hunts Point or in these other neighborhoods that are just sort of living paycheck to paycheck? Is that the population that we're looking at?
I think it's a really fantastic question and point. I mean, if you look at even what is considered the poverty measure across the country, that's at an income that I think was set 40, 50 years ago, right? And so there are a lot of times you hear about a percentage above that is really sort of updated for what we need now. In fact, this report that CEO put out in 2014 was in some part a response to the mismatch of how that measure just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense anymore. Plus, I believe, and I recommend this report. I'm not saying that this is what I believe in, but I do think that they took a very comprehensive view at answering your question, in part. That there are also considering what are some of the benefits that people who are living below a certain threshold of income, what they are receiving and how that gets factored in as well. So it's a very complex view of how we should be measuring this. And so even though it's one measure, I really respect the amount of scholarship that went into getting to this number. The fact is that it's actually not up to me, right? So the job that I have is to get as many of our stakeholders to come together to have that very conversation, that we may decide it makes more sense for us to work with very specifically the working poor, as you, I think, were describing them, because that's an area where that's a group that gets the least amount of support. That may end up being at the heart of this plan going forward. But that wouldn't be for me to decide. What I would sort of want to put back on you is, can you pull together a group of folks, whether they are supporting those people or if it's them themselves, so we can hear directly about what that experience is. I have to say, I haven't seen a whole lot of stuff out there about this population. So the more you can connect us to those folks or to that, that scholarship, we would really appreciate that.
Okay, good. Are there any other questions, comments? I want to thank you for coming in. This has really been an eye-opener for all of us, and I thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Okay. Our last presentation, where did I put it? Oh, it's on the back, okay, is on the current programs and initiatives of the Commission on Human Rights, and we have Kajori, the director for Community Service Center. We thank you for coming in. You've been a regular with us, and we thank you for that.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be a regular. Sorry. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kajuri Chaudhary, and I'm the director of the Bronx Community Service Center for the New York City Commission on Human Rights. We've gone through some really amazing information today, so I will not take much of your time. I am here today to talk a little bit about our programs as well as some current initiatives that are happening across the city and what we are doing here in the Bronx as well. We are a city agency that enforces and educates communities about the city's human rights law. The law, as you all know, covers areas of housing, workplace, public accommodation, based on 22 broad protected classes. The law also has additional provisions around discriminatory harassment and bias-based profiling by law enforcement. We, at the Bronx office, recently we've done the Fair Housing Symposium, and many of you from here attended and supported us, so thank you for that. We did our first ever African Communities Panel and Resource Fair, which was held at MCNY. And we also very recently, in partnership with Girls Vow and VIP, did the first annual Girls and Women Summit. So as you can see, we've been very busy bringing resources to communities in New York City. The Commission has reported a significant increase in discrimination inquiries in 2016, a nearly 60% increase, and we see that trend continuing in 2017. So as of now, we've already, at this time, compared to at this time last year, we've already seen 30% more complaints of discrimination. And what we've seen, even though disability has continued to be the protected class where we get most complaints about, there has also been a 30% increase in reports of national origin, race, religion, and alienated citizenship status discrimination. Having seen all that increase, the Commission decided to launch a campaign, and we are in the current period of the campaign. The campaign is ongoing. We have one more week to it, and it's called the I Do Have the Right campaign, and you may have seen, I'm just gonna go through some of the pictures. So the campaign basically talks about there are 6 individuals pictures as we see here. And these 6 ads talk about individuals standing up to scenarios of discrimination. So whether it's housing, whether it's race, it's religion, it's standing up to the discrimination and saying, like, you know, I do have the right, and we do have the right. In New York City, we are trying to send this message to all New Yorkers, irrespective of where we come from, what we believe in, what we look like, we all have rights. And we also want to send this message that people who violate those rights will be taken accountable, will be held accountable by the city and by the Commission on Human Rights. These ads have appeared in public places, in like subways, bus stands, bodegas, in laundromats, and they have also appeared in 25 ethnic and community newspapers. So not only are they in English and Spanish, the broad ads are in English and Spanish, but they've also appeared in newspapers in Chinese, Korean, Arabic, and Bengali across the city. It's also the idea is not only to make New Yorkers reaffirm our rights in New York City, but also perhaps to start having conversations about what this means. Like, so one of my kids' favorite things to do on the subway is when they see the ad on the subway, they're like, that's mom's work ad. And then they're like, okay, that's about housing, or that's about employment. So it's letting New Yorkers know and be able to engage with each other about what it means to be a New Yorker and what it means to have rights in the city. We planned a day of action last Friday on June 16th, where our team were placed across the 5 boroughs, and in the Bronx, we did outreach in Parkchester, we were at Fordham Plaza, and we were at 49th Street, Grand Concourse stations. Again, reaffirming to our fellow New Yorkers that the city is here we have your back. The city is here to protect, no matter where you come from. So at this time, when the bias incidents are rising locally as well as nationally. We do feel that this campaign has led to reaffirm our rights and our message to New Yorkers. Now, one of the reasons I'm here today is to request that please engage with us. Please, as part of community boards, if you are getting complaints about such discrimination, harassment, bias incidents in your community, please call us. Please let us know. We will work with the community to make sure that people understand their rights, and then there is a recourse as well. We have been working with a lot of nonprofits and others to do Know Your Rights Forum. If you want such one in your board, please let us know. We have also, the whole idea is for us also is to bring government to people. So we have in our agency launched mobile clinics where we are out there once a month with a nonprofit partner in their space so that communities don't necessarily have to come to us. We are there in spaces which communities trust and are able to come to us and talk about incidents of bias and report. So for community boards as well, if you feel that this is a service that would be useful for your community board, we would go out there and be a part of it. When we do the call for action, please come and join us in outreach. And that's our ask from you for this campaign. There's one more additional thing which I wasn't planning to talk about today, but it has recently happened, and you all may be aware that in Queens, there was an incident earlier this week where a landlord had sent letters to tenants saying that they wanted proof of citizenship status. That's a violation of our law, and our agency had immediately come in, issued a letter of cease and desist, and also letting him know that this was a violation of the law, and also ordered him to withdraw the notice that he had sent and comply with the New York City rights law. So if you are hearing such incidents, please contact us, because again, our entire goal is to make sure that the city has every New Yorker's back, and violations of such will not be tolerated in New York City. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Adeline?
I'm so glad to hear this, because in our area we have a huge Bangladesh population that's complaining a lot about the bias, the way they're being treated. And different incidences have happened regarding safety. So we would definitely be contacting you. Thank you.
Please do that. And just to add, in our Bronx office, we have, in addition to English, we have the capacity to do things in Spanish, French, and Bengali.
Okay, Mr. Hall?
Just wanted to comment that a lot of the discrimination is based on cultural insensitivity, and what happens is there's so many cultures in our area, we don't understand each other, and a lot of it is just based on ignorance. It's not necessarily trying to be discriminatory, but I think we need more forums where we have the ability to understand the different cultures and what their issues are.
That's absolutely correct, and that is why we also work with a lot of interfaith agencies to engage in honest conversation between faith communities, because often that's the first step where people go to and people engage with. So yeah, thank you for that.
And that's why the borough president invites everyone to the multicultural events, all of the events, because the best way to understand a person is to be around them and to understand their culture, their language. Absolutely. Thank you. Are there any other questions, comments? Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Before I adjourn, there's a couple of things I need to share with you on our first topic, which was the self-storage text. Please note that all community boards and all council members are eligible to vote. Also, community boards must vote at the board level to cast their vote at the borough board meeting. So your board has to vote on a particular item before your board can vote here at the borough board meeting, okay? Also, here, you say it.
The storage text amendments will be taken up at the July Borough Board meeting, which is being held on July the 12th. So boards, it's a combined, so the boards who have not yet met or voted on those should do so before the 12th. If you do not have a board vote before then, you will have to abstain from the vote.
I came
Dan?
late. Were they going to go around to the board city planning?
They supposedly have already been reaching out to the boards.
They have not come to ours. I'm rather
Now, did
disappointed
you-
in their timing again.
Well, this was sent out as a ULERP to the boards like months ago, like over a month ago. So
They've been
we had it in
notified
the
by
office. It was a 30-day ULERP that was sent to your office. So check with it.
Check with mine,
Okay, there needs to be follow-up on that. I have some other announcements, but before I do that, first of all, I want to thank Dan Paternak for participating in our meetings. Dan, I understand this is your last meeting with us.
It is. Thank
You
you,
will-
Deputy Borough President.
And we thank you for your service.
We have an unwritten rule on Board 8 that after 3 years, the chair steps down. And our next chair is going to be Rosemary Ginty, and she is an exceptional person. If you don't know
Yes.
her already, she's remarkable in every aspect, and she's been to a number of these meetings as well.
She has, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I also didn't at the beginning welcome, though he's come many times before, Robert Crespo, who is the acting chair of Community Board 2. Welcome back. Now, I do have announcements. There's a Bronx Recruitment Day on Friday, June 23rd, which is tomorrow, from 10 to 1 at the Bronx Overall Economic Development Corporation at the County Building, 851 Grand Concourse. And it's an opportunity to connect with 20 area businesses and hundreds of jobs. So it's almost like a job fair, right? And so people can ask questions, and I'm so glad that we have this, because someone called me yesterday about needing a job, so I will call them back and give them this information. Also, the Bronx District Attorney, Darcel Clark, is asking you to save the date for another chance. It's to resolve outstanding summons warrants, clear your record without fear of arrest. It's going to take place on Saturday, August 5th, 2017, from 9 to 4 at the Eastchester Presbyterian Church, which is at 3154 Fish Avenue in the Northeast Bronx. Warrants for quality of life summonses include consumption of alcohol in public, disorderly conduct, unlawful possession of marijuana, trespassing, or loitering and littering, unlawful possession of marijuana and noise violation, various subway offenses, and urinating in public, and many more. This is being done in collaboration with the Office of Court Administration, the Bronx Defenders, the New York Police Department, and the Eastchester Presbyterian Church. So we have these flyers there in Spanish and English, so you can get them, and also the Recruitment Day flyers, all right? So with that, I believe Tom has already announced our next meeting will be a combined meeting on July 12th. And so at this point, I adjourn the meeting.